So before starting my presentation, I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation, fantastic event. And of course, incredible location. I'm very happy that since the beginning, the digitalization has two directions. First, what is possible, and then what are the rules to be given? Because the technological progress is only one part. The other one is really, linked to how to live in the future, question of good life. So I think that social sciences have an important role in defining and, dealing with those topics. I'm very happy also to see young people here in the room all together, because it is our world which we are creating today, and your democracy as well, which is at stake. So I think, for that reason, that the goal of the foundations here are to think of the transfer from this discussion, which is scientific discussion, so getting to a wider discussion and debate, which is linked to legal aspects. So I would like now to continue my presentation in English.
Ladies and gentlemen, digitalization is heralded as the game changer in town for democracy. It allows for global connectedness and real-time transmission and information between citizens and the state. So when people talk about democracy in the digital age, many have great expectations. But there are also people who are less optimistic, people that talk of the decline of democracy in the digital age. They are in despair, and some have high hopes. So on the one hand, there are the net optimists that think that digitalization can lead to greater transparency and democratic participation that will improve political decisions. On the other hand, there are net pessimists that warn about the risks of these new technologies. Like in George Orwell's Big Brother story of 1984, digitalization can be used for the surveillance of citizens, for unprecedented forms of totalitarian control. And then, of course, there are the net realists like us. The realists acknowledge the risks that come with technology for democratic life, but they also recognize the potential for interaction the digital offers between citizens and politics, but, and I underline but, only if certain conditions are met. So in any case, democracy in the digital age is a very emotional topic, even in academia. And I'm talking about the social sciences here. So today we want to challenge the optimistic view, the idea that digital media represent a remedy or even a medicine for the current crisis of democracy. So you might wonder, what kind of crisis? Why is democracy in crisis? As we all know, historically, democracy evolved from self-rule and direct towards representative democracy. Representation has proven the most efficient and manageable way, in particular for states where society spreads across a large territory. It only needs a small number of people to conduct public affairs. While it has its origin in the 18th century with the founding fathers of the United States, it has become the standard type of modern liberal democracy. In representative democracy, participation is usually limited to participation in elections and engagement in political parties. But this understanding of democracy has functioned for a while, and particularly after the Second World War. However, if we look at the state of democratic life today, we see that liberal democracy is in crisis. Some people even talk about post-democracy today. This means that all democratic institutions remain formally in place. They are working. But the energy of the political system and the innovative capacity has moved to other spheres. So democracy is an empty shell. But is it really true? Yes and no. Yes, because there is depoliticization going on, a dominance of the economical over the political, If the market makes the rule without political consultation, it's a domination of politics of economics over politics. There's a dominance of pretended practical constraints over political room for maneuver. There's a lack of alternatives. And the politics of austerity is an example in case. Not only European, but also national, regional, and local governments feel that they're incapable to act in many cases. Accordingly, there is a massive decline of public confidence from the citizens in the capability of governments to solve problems today and to represent the aspirations of ordinary citizens. So one might say it's a crisis of representation. And a big majority of citizens distrust the government today. At the same time, they don't think that making a vote or voting makes a difference, or even engaging in a political party. So there's a wide gap opening between citizens on the one hand and political elites on the other, which of course produces, as you know, populism and other consequences. But I believe that the situation is not hopeless, because at the same time as depoliticization is going on, there's a process we might call repolitization. There's an increasing interest in alternative forms of participation, in more direct and less institutional involvement of citizens in public affairs. So in general, citizens have developed very high expectations to be involved in politics and having a say in it. And this for two reasons. One is that you can prove empirically that after World War II, the mass education in general sort of increased immensely. On the other hand, through the use of internet in a large scale from the 1990s, people have very easily access to information. So they can, as you can see from an initiative called Transparent International, they can evaluate government's action. And so they feel themselves on par with government officials in the capability of identifying and addressing problems. And it is here that digital media are expected to be a change maker. And truly, there are many very good forms and new forms of engagement online that show an amazing amount of innovative capacity. Their aim is to democratize democracy and to empower ordinary citizens in new ways. But the question is, do they achieve this aim and really deepen interaction between a wide range of diverse citizens on the one hand and politics on the other? Do they really improve meaningful conversation and meaningful communication? Do they lead to better decisions? Do they help to establish a new political culture? In order to answer these questions, we need to differentiate between different forms of online participation. So you might say you have top-down initiatives by the states on the one hand, and those who emerge from bottom-up as a result from citizens and civil society. These are different forms of online participation, top-down and bottom-up. So let's first look at the top-down initiatives. Today, governments, agencies, including European Union and international organizations like the UN, use a variety of forms to consult and connect with citizens. Most prominent examples are e-voting, online questionnaires, forums, news groups, or e-consultations. But what picture does emerge if one has a closer look at these prominent forms of top-down participation? Let's take the example of e-voting. It motivates a greater share of citizens, or the hope is that it motivates a greater share of citizens to participate in political life. But does it really work? A recent report that summarizes the European countries' experiences show that e-voting did not result in a higher turnout of voters. At the same time, e-voting has been confronted with security issues which has not been easily overcome by government. Let's take another example, e-consultations. Did they manage better? Did they manage to stimulate citizens to engage in political debates? If we take a closer look at these recent top-down consultations, it becomes a rather mixed picture. I'm taking two examples, a good one and a bad one. Let's take the good one first. It's an example from Italy. It's called Io Partecipo, organized by the government of the region Emilia-Romagna. The government established an online portal for citizens to interact on issues of public interest for their communities, but also to communicate with local administration about expectations and needs in certain policy areas. Online discussions occur on regular basis about ongoing city projects, so it's still going on, this project. But the good thing is, at first it was moderated professionally, so it was very well done by the state agency. And second, there's a regular feedback, and this is very important, a feedback by the state on what happened with the results of these discussions. Otherwise, it's pointless to discuss, right? So meaningful communication about community problems have been strengthened in this case. And now let's take a bad example. It's from Germany. It's the online dialogue on the future of Germany by Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2012. This so-called competition of ideas has been widely criticized as being an example of mere symbolic or image policy. 11,000 suggestions came out what to do in politics, ideas about, solutions. And 1.7 million citizens participated. It was a very expensive project. But the second most voted idea was liberalizing cannabis, because some group of activists realized to motivate their members. So in the end, but it's not because of this particular idea, but because of the online participation was conceived this way, nothing happened with all these ideas, even with the good ones. So it was completely pointless, a waste of time and a waste of money. This is not, by the way, to do a Merkel bashing, which in particular in other countries, because not only the Chancellor Merkel, but also the government learned from this experience and recently did a big online participation on what is a good life, how do we want to live, and this was done much better. But the problem of this bad example is that they simulate interaction, yeah? So they promote indifference rather than closing the gap between citizens and the state. And so they promote a discussion with results without having any consequences. And this is the worst thing which can happen, of course, because this reinforces the disenchantment by the citizens with the state, etc., etc. And we're now giving the word to Ariane.
Yeah, thank you, Patrizia. So Patrizia so far spoke about top-down online participation, and I will now look a little bit into what happens with online political participation from bottom-up initiatives. And these are actually, these kind of participations, there are many forms, many of which you are daily probably you're embedded in. So they include social media like Twitter or Facebook, citizen-driven platforms for e-activism like change.org, networked knowledge platforms such as Wikipedia or WikiLeaks, or forms of e-information like mass emails for campaigning. This means that civil society initiatives are very diverse, and that it helps to think about it perhaps that there are some forms which are organized and some forms which have somehow an accidental character. And because several of these initiatives were not initially intended to foster political online participation, but have come to be used this way, because they enable the user to acquire and exchange knowledge, build a community, and for that reason they can become politically consequential. So I would first like to touch on an accidental form in the regard of social media, because this is very close to our lives and it shows, I think it's a good illustration. As you might all know, or participate in already, a significant share of political discussion today and exchange takes place on social media. And for example, you can have a discussion of a controversial Facebook post amongst friends or strangers. Or you can have a politicized Twitter conversation around a particular topic with no official or direct link to the political system. So to manage the flood of information available on social media, we see that people communicate mostly with personal mini-publics, that is, people you follow or that follow your posts. Moreover, technological options like hashtags on Twitter allow citizens to create ad hoc publics that communicate with each other over a topic for a certain amount of time and then they disappear again. However, what do we see about the quality of these public exchanges? And it seems usually deep discussion and open-minded exchanges are not at all at the center of these interactions. Examples show that only in the best cases, and they are very seldom, these exchanges foster mutual learning about different perspectives and draw political attention to certain topics. In the worst case, such mini-publics represent an echo chamber which reinforces stereotypes about elites and overall fosters populism. And therefore, this is just to say, if you talk about digital media or the use of digital technologies for democracy, we have to see that of course, they might have the potential to fuel empowerment and interaction, but equally, segmentation and polarization of the political public is looming around the corner. And now you probably say such communicative challenges are not specific to online public communication, and that's very true. However, what we see with political online participation and communication is that we have to deal with a totally different scale as traditional media. A false rumor distributed via social media can end up drawing similar attention as traditional mass media, however, with a slight difference that the only traditional mass media follows ethical standards. So the problem is that so-called shitstorms, hate speech, or the spreading of false information and the polarization of publics all affects our political culture and agenda setting. And rather than fostering, in many cases, it prevents mutual listening and esteem among citizens, and it increases the gap between citizen and politics. And it's a rather new development, so research is very inconclusive what this might mean in the longer term for our democratic cultures. Now let's look at the example of organized forms of citizen online participation, and a good example for a civil society platform that can lead to civic re-engagement with political themes and a re-engagement with political institutions too, is the case of change.org. I presume many of you, or some of you probably might already have participated in this. It was founded in 2007, and it's an international online campaign platform that allows citizens to write petitions and share them online and see whether other citizens support the cause. And the unique feature of this is that the platform does not have by itself a political agenda or selection mechanisms other than that other citizens sign on to the cause. If you look at the history, and also I think by now in Italy it's over 5 million who have participated since 2012. It has the potential and has in the past, at least in the German case, helped to raise awareness about pressing issues and bring to the attention of politics concerns that otherwise might have been marginalized. So what we try to understand, what we try to show is that it's really important to understand that online participation is not per se good, nor is it per se democratic. The question is rather, what are the requirements for rendering online participation democratic? And if you remember what Patrizia said in beginning of the talk, like several criteria are very important if we want to have a vivid democratic culture. It's that people engage with each other, that citizens and politics start to interact more productively, that citizens also know about political institutions, how they work, and basically also to have meaningful public communications where we can discuss all the ethical issues that came up in this morning panel that are connected to introducing new technologies and their potentially disruptive effects for society, economics, and politics. So what are the requirements for achieving this, for democratizing democracy through online participation? And thinking about it, let's differentiate again between top-down and bottom-up participation. And I would like to start with top-down participation initiatives. There are basically 3 requirements that are important in order for them to be democratic, and they already have come through in the talk of Patrizia. First, it's, you really need to have a good process of citizen participation which leaves room for maneuver. There must be alternatives on the table. So if, in the other case, in the contrasted case, if participation is only used to legitimize a policy that has already been decided upon, it's only window dressing, and it will increase distrust and do disfavor to democracy. Second, if you recall Angela Merkel's online dialogue, where we know that nothing happened with the 11,000 suggestions from the citizen, nor was the communication or the feedback very existent, basically. So this points to the fact that if the feedback there must be a mandatory feedback form from representatives and public officials on how they deal with the suggestions from the citizens, what they do with them. And which means that participation must have an effect on political decision-making, not in the sense that citizens decide on a given issue, but that there is a mutual recognition, mutual exchange on, I give my opinion, I give my expertise, and what do you do with it? Otherwise, it's a frustrating experience. Third, top-down online participation is often criticized of involving the usual suspects, namely those who are wealthy, well-educated, people with time and online skills. And instead, for it to become meaningful and something that democratizes and brings together rather than further disaggregate and segmentate, there should come, participants should be representative of the overall population. And we need points of view that exist in the larger society, and we need a variety of these points of view, not perhaps 2 or 3 that are the most dominant ones. And only if this requirement is met, and only if this heterogeneity of communities is cared for, participation can be a remedy for populism and a source of democratic revival. So perhaps the most urgent challenge of participation today is the mobilization and empowerment of those citizens who feel left behind from society, socially and politically. Now, these requirements of feedback, room for maneuver, and inclusive representation apply particularly to top-down initiatives. For bottom-up initiatives, we have 3 additional requirements that are central for preserving democratic citizenship. All address the most basic and technical level, and basically they reflect our concern that the digital infrastructure must be governed according to the constitutional rights and democratic principles. And this means, first, that service providers and governments should treat all data the same, not discriminating or charging differently or differentially by user, content, website, application. And this is usually negotiated under the principle or term of net neutrality, and the EU has just in August put forward a more rigid regulatory framework, but there are still some loopholes in there. For example, a case in point is zero rating, where service providers could allow some applications to be used free of charge, which of course then might lead the users to particularly take the free version rather than draw on other information. Second, algorithm must be impartial. Algorithms are created by humans and they entail human prejudices, usually favoring privileged groups over underprivileged groups in society. And this also applies to machine learning algorithms that can introduce unintentional bias, much like humans do. And some universities start working on a program that looks at programs to detect biases in algorithms used. Third, civil and social rights must be actively guarded, not only offline, but especially online. A growing number of civil rights violations occur online, for instance, by governments engaging in surveillance and data storing. Others are driven by users and groups of users targeting individuals and groups with, what I mentioned before, hate speech and shitstorms, or by sharing intimate content, which all basically limits the targeted person's freedom of speech, their personal intactness, and in some cases where application challenge our established social rights, and Uber in some countries can be a case in point, it also challenges their capability to participate socioeconomically in society. So as a conclusion, if all these requirements for top-down and bottom-up initiatives of online participation were met, and you might have realized, wow, they are very, very ambitious, and they are, digital media can become a game changer for democracy. But of course, these democratic digital conditions will only become established through responsible regulation. And this will definitely not happen without a strong political will and/or a strong political demand and push by citizens, by us, and especially by you, the students, who will have to deal with potentially disruptive side effects of some forms of digitalization. So it's really the time to engage with this topic, also from the social science side, more actively, and as a democratic citizens. In concluding, we want to address the question that emerged at the end of Sheila Yazanov's talk yesterday, but also popped up again during today's morning session. Is there a substitute for the informed and concerned citizenry? And we think if we don't want to give up democracy, the question poses itself very differently. It is the question of how to preserve democratic citizenship in the digital age. And this preservation can only be achieved through rules we give ourselves democratically and through civic education, which also was mentioned this morning. We are very much looking forward to discuss with you later on, and I would just like to say, if you're interested to look more about examples, ways of how to participate and engage, and what it means, there is a very good manual by Patrizia Nanz, which you can retrieve online. It's in Italian, and also perhaps it's particularly interesting for the students. There is a website, it's an open source, participedia.net, where you can see democratic innovations worldwide, and also there's a lot about Italy and democratic innovations. Thank you very much.